There's a hill in central China that looks like nothing at all. Grass, a few trees, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second glance. But stand on top of it, and you are standing on the single greatest unopened mystery left on planet Earth. Somewhere beneath your feet lies a chamber no living person has ever entered. Sealed for over 2,000 years. Older than the fall of Rome. Older than Christianity itself. We know exactly where it is. We've known for decades. And here's the part that should stop you cold: we could go in. Right now. We have the technology, the money, the manpower. We just won't. Which raises a question far stranger than any lost city or hidden treasure ever could. If the door is right there, why does no one dare open it? To understand why that hill terrifies archaeologists, you have to understand the man buried inside it. His name was Ying Zheng. History remembers him as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Before him there was no China. Just 7 warring kingdoms, tearing each other apart for centuries. He conquered all of them. Every single one. And in 221 BC, for the first time in history, he declared them a single empire. His empire. He standardized the currency, the writing system, even the width of cart axles, so every road in his new nation could carry the same wheels. This was a man who didn't just want to rule the present. He wanted to redesign reality itself. And then came the obsession that would define the rest of his life. He became consumed, utterly consumed, with cheating death. He sent expeditions across the sea searching for a mythical elixir of immortality. He consumed mercury tablets, believing they'd extend his life. They almost certainly poisoned him instead. But immortality had a backup plan. If he couldn't live forever, he would build something that could. Work on his tomb began when he was just 13 years old, decades before he'd even finished conquering the kingdoms that would make him emperor. Construction continued for 38 years. Historical accounts describe as many as 700,000 workers. Let that number sit for a second. 700,000. An underground project on a scale the ancient world had never attempted, for a man who refused to accept that his story would ever end. So the question isn't just what's down there. It's this: if a man spent 38 years in an army of workers building a world to survive his own death, what exactly did he build? In March of 1974, a group of farmers in Lintong County were doing something ordinary. Digging a well. Looking for water in the middle of a drought. Their shovels hit something else. Fragments of clay. A face. Then a shoulder. Then armor. They had no idea what they'd found. No one did, not yet. But what those farmers pulled out of the ground that day would turn out to be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. Archaeologists arrived. Then they kept digging. And what they uncovered wasn't one statue. There was an army. Row after row after row of life-size soldiers, standing exactly where they'd been placed over 2,000 years earlier, facing east in full battle formation as if still waiting for an order to march. To date, roughly 2,000 of these soldiers have been excavated. But estimates suggest the true number buried at this site is somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000. And here's what makes it even stranger. These aren't identical mass-produced figures. Look closely and every single face is different. Different expressions. Different hairstyles. Different builds, like the sculptors were working from real men, not a template. Some of them still carry weapons. Real bronze swords. Real crossbow triggers, engineered with a level of precision that still functions today. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. This was a fully operational army, built underground for a war that was never supposed to happen in this world. And every single one of those thousands of soldiers is facing the exact same direction. Toward the mound. Toward the one door in this entire complex that, to this day, no one has ever opened. So what's actually behind that door? For that, there's only one witness. And he never even saw it. His name was Sima Qian, a court historian writing roughly a century after the emperor's death. His book, The Records of the Grand Historian, is the only written account describing what lies inside that tomb. No blueprint. No inventory. Just one man's report, passed down through second-hand sources, decades after the fact. And what he describes sounds less like a burial chamber and more like a myth. He writes of a ceiling engineered to depict the heavens, the sun, the moon, the constellations recreated in precious stones above the emperor's body. He writes of a floor built as a map of the entire empire, mountains sculpted in relief and rivers, real rivers, the Yangtze and the Yellow River, recreated in flowing liquid mercury. And he writes of something darker still. Mechanical crossbows, rigged and loaded, engineered to fire automatically at anyone who dared to break in. a river of poison, a trap-laden fortress, a sky made of jewels. It reads like legend. It reads like the kind of story that grows a little more impossible every time it's retold. And for centuries, that's exactly what historians assumed it was. A flourish, an exaggeration written to make a dead emperor sound godlike. But here's the detail that should make you sit up. Sima Qian didn't just write about a ceiling and a floor. He wrote about mercury specifically, a toxic heavy metal in quantities large enough to form flowing rivers across a man-made landscape. That's an oddly specific claim to invent from nothing. So the real question isn't whether the story sounds true. It's whether, 2,000 years later, science can actually check. Here's what should baffle you. We are not living in the 1970s anymore. We have satellites that can measure a centimeter of ground shift from orbit. We have robots that crawl through collapsed mines. We have surgeons who operate through incisions the width of a pencil. We could go in. So why, after 50 years of studying every inch of this site, does that one chamber remain completely untouched? The answer isn't a lack of ambition. It's a memory. A very specific, very painful one. When archaeologists first pulled those terracotta soldiers out of the ground, many of them weren't the dull clay gray we see in museums today. They were painted, vivid reds, blues, purples, built with astonishing detail. And then the air hit them. Within minutes, not years, not months, minutes, the paint began to curl, crack, and flake away. 2,000 years of color, gone almost instantly, the moment the seal of the earth was broken. It gets worse. Decades earlier, in Beijing, archaeologists excavated the tomb of a different Chinese emperor, Wanli. The result was catastrophic. Silk robes disintegrated. Priceless artifacts crumbled to dust before anyone could preserve them. A tragedy the archaeological world has never forgotten. Now scale that lesson up to the single most important chamber in Chinese history. A space potentially untouched, unbreathed, unseen for over 2,000 years. If a wooden coffin, a painted mural, a scroll of silk is sitting in there, the moment that door opens, you may only get one look at it before it's gone forever. So the world's archaeologists made a choice. Wait. But waiting doesn't mean giving up. It means finding a way to look inside, without ever opening the door at all. If you can't open the door, you build a way to see through the walls. That's exactly what modern archaeologists did. Using ground-penetrating radar and other geophysical scanning tools, researchers began quietly mapping the mausoleum from the surface, sending signals down through decades of packed earth, reading what bounced back. And piece by piece, an outline began to emerge. Walls, gates, an internal structure, layered beneath the mound with a level of architectural planning that shouldn't have been possible over 2,000 years ago. The scans confirmed something remarkable. The layout beneath that hill wasn't random. It mirrored the design of Xianyang, the ancient Qin capital itself. An underground city built in the image of the empire above it. Inner walls, outer walls, a palace at the center, positioned with precision. And at the heart of it all, the central chamber. Still, undisturbed. According to the scans, still fully intact. Which means, for the first time in 2,000 years, we finally have confirmation of something extraordinary. Nobody has ever broken in. No looters, no accidents, no collapse. Whatever survived down there for over 2 millennia is very likely still exactly where it was left. That should be a triumphant moment. Proof the tomb is real, intact, and waiting. But it also raises the stakes on everything else Sima Qian claimed. Because if the architecture in his account checks out, what about the part of his story that sounded the most like fiction? The part about a river that was never supposed to exist. A river made of liquid metal flowing beneath that same, still-sealed ground. For decades, the Mercury River was treated as the least believable part of the entire legend. A poetic flourish. A story too strange to be literal. Then scientists actually tested the ground. Soil samples taken from the mound revealed something researchers weren't fully expecting. Mercury concentrations significantly higher than the surrounding Earth. Not scattered randomly either. Concentrated in patterns that roughly traced the shape of ancient China's major waterways, as if something below really had been laid out to mirror rivers. That alone was enough to make historians sit up. But it left one enormous question unanswered. If there really was mercury down there, where did 2,000 years worth of it actually come from? That question sat unresolved for years. Until 2025. Archaeological surveys conducted in Xuanyang City in the mountains of Shaanxi province uncovered something remarkable, evidence of an ancient mining and smelting operation built around deposits of cinnabar. Cinnabar, the mineral source of mercury itself. A region with a documented, centuries-old history of extracting exactly the substance the legend described. Suddenly, a 2,000-year-old sentence written by a man who never entered the tomb, describing rivers of liquid metal beneath an emperor's palace, had a real, physical, geological source. Sit with that for a second. A historian, writing from second-hand accounts a century after the emperor died, made a claim so strange it sounded invented. And 21 centuries later, modern isotopic science went looking for the source of that exact material, and found it. This isn't proof of what's sitting inside that chamber right now. No one has seen it. No one has touched it. But it is something almost as unsettling. It's proof that the storyteller was telling the truth. Which means every other claim in that account, the ceiling built like the night sky, the mechanical traps rigged to kill intruders, an emperor sealed at the exact center of a miniature version of the empire he built, none of it can be dismissed as myth anymore. Not after this. Because if the smallest, strangest, most implausible detail in a 2,000-year-old story just turned out to be geologically real, what does that tell us about the rest of what's still sitting untouched in the dark below that hill? Go back for a moment to the boy who started building this tomb at 13 years old, long before he was an emperor, long before he'd conquered a single kingdom. Even then, something in him refused to accept the one thing every human being eventually has to accept. He spent his adult life chasing elixirs, swallowing mercury tablets he believed would grant him eternal life, the same substance, it turns out, that may now be flowing beneath his tomb in symbolic rivers. The thing he thought would save him may be the same thing preserved forever in his memory. He never found immortality, not the kind he was looking for, but look at what he actually built instead. A tomb so vast in scale, so precisely engineered, so carefully protected by both ancient design and modern caution, that it has now outlasted every single dynasty that came after him. Outlasted empires that rose and fell for 2,000 years while he stayed exactly where he was, untouched, unopened, unbothered by any of it. In a strange way, he won. Not the immortality of living forever. Something closer to control. The ability to remain permanently just out of reach, protected not by walls or traps but by our own restraint. By archaeologists, generations later, choosing caution over curiosity, because the risk of losing what's down there is greater than the desire to see it. He built a monument designed to survive its intruders. Instead, it did something more effective. It convinced us not to become intruders at all. And that leaves us with something far stranger than a solved mystery or an unsolved one. It leaves us with a mystery we could end and won't. So we come back to the hill. Grass, a few trees. Still nothing to look at if you didn't know any better. But you know better now. You know that beneath that quiet slope sits a chamber sealed since before the Roman Empire fell. That an army of thousands still stands guard, facing east, waiting for an order that will never come. That a historian who never once stepped inside described a river of poison flowing beneath a painted sky, and that, one soil sample at a time, modern science keeps proving him right. We have the tools to open that door. We have had them for years. And still it stays closed. Not because we failed to solve this mystery, because for once we chose to let it stay one. Somewhere down there, in the dark, an emperor who spent his life terrified of being forgotten is still lying exactly where he was placed 22 centuries ago, protected now not by crossbow traps or rivers of mercury, but by our own patience, our own fear of getting it wrong. Maybe one day the technology will finally catch up to the risk. Maybe a future generation will stand where you are right now and watch that door open for the very first time. Or maybe it never happens. Maybe this is simply where the story ends, not with an answer but with a hill, still sealed, still waiting, still keeping its secret for as long as we let it.